to the Language Teachers Forum. It's a joint initiative between Griffith University and the Modern Language Teachers Association of Queensland. So we're very pleased that you're all here, and Fiona and her team to do the one on C2C. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Fiona Scott. I'm one of the assistant managers for the C2C project. I started out as a writer in 2015 and then progressed further and oversaw the writing of the P4 units for Japanese, Chinese, German, French, and now we're working on the Indonesian and Italian at the moment for P4. I have a couple of other of our assistant managers here with us as well. David Goldsworthy is our assistant manager he's working with the Indonesian team at the moment, but he's been overseeing the whole project. He started even before I did. And Kirsten Liebchen is another one of our assistant managers who's been working on the German, Chinese, Indonesian and Italian. Heidi is one of our writers for German, and she's been sort of filling in with the Indonesian teams and the Italian teams as we sort of wrap up the project at the moment. So Laura Broadbent sends her apologies. She's our curriculum manager. She has been overseeing the project as well as while we develop these resources. So I'll just sort of get started. Has everybody had a chance to, have we all had a look at C2C products? And so yeah, I've got a very quick overview into sort of accessing and all of that sort of stuff, which was done in a presentation that we did last year. But just to sort of review over it, and then I'll pass it over to Kirsten, and she's going to talk about our P4 units. And then I've got a little bit more information on adapting and things along those lines. So this is just a sort of screenshot of some of our resources that we have. Band plans are up the top, so they're those sort of organisational documents. There's text, there's learning objects, and sheets and activities and slideshows that students can use. It gives you an idea about the structure of our units and what sort of teaching and learning experiences are available as a part of those units, and how you can use them with your students. So the other sort of part of the presentation that I'm going to talk about a little bit later on is adopting and adapting our units. We're coming towards the end of writing for the model units, and we've sort of been reflecting on the process, and through that we've started developing some advice documents. So it's where we're sort of moving in the future with our C2C resources. There's a few sort of sticky notes hanging around, so if you want to write down questions or anything like that, or if you feel free, I mean there's not many people here, so we can sort of interrupt if you have any questions. I don't have any problems with that. And yeah, if it's specifically on what we're sort of talking about. So yeah. So we've got units that are for the Prep 2 Year 10 sequence. Right. Following the F to 10 pathway for the Australian curriculum. They're model units. Our units we describe them as model units. They're designed to be flexible and adaptable to your context. You have the ability to make changes to differentiate or to adapt the resources for your specific cohort of students. All of the resources are actually editable by you. They're Word documents or PowerPoint documents, with the exception of the interactive audio-visual text like the learning objects and the ebooks. But all of the PowerPoints or slideshows and student activity sheets and model responses are all able to be edited. All of the full suite of resources is available for French, Japanese, German and Chinese on Download Manager, which is EQ sort of, the Download Manager online. Indonesian and Italian, all of the years 5 to 10 units are available now, and units 1 to unit 7 in the P2 sequence are also now available on Download Manager. Scoodle comes up a little bit later on, and I don't know sort of what status they're really at, but there are quite a few units, even including the P4 units for Japanese and French, because they were the first ones that were published. And I think as we've been going through, there has also started being German and Chinese available on Scoodle. Sorry, Kirsten, can you just go back to the previous slide? This is a nice, easy sort of website that you guys can remember to access the Download Manager page or access the C2C website. It directs you to this screen, and if you go to the Download Manager online, that's where you can access the units. You still need to extract all to make sure that you can view all the files appropriately. Now, as I've seen on the MLTAQ sort of Facebook page and the lists and things along those lines, the Premier's Reading Challenge has included languages this year, and we've included our C2C ebooks as a part of it. It's a selection of them for French, German, Chinese and Japanese. They have all been actually unlocked, so you don't have to have access to the Learning Place to access these, or you don't have to have a login to the Learning Place to access these ebooks. So that's a really sort of great thing about these resources.
Can I just interrupt there to say that, and perhaps you've had a look yourself, but the Readers Challenge, the languages books are in a separate list, and I'm worried that librarians won't realise and won't even see them. So I think it's really important for us languages teachers to alert the librarians and classroom teachers, whoever, to those lists via the link. You know, it's still on the Premier's Reading Challenge page where you find the book list, but it's a separate list.
Yeah,
it's halfway through, so you actually need to instruct your librarians that they need to scan halfway through that link, and then there are 2 links, P to 1 and 1 to 3.
Something that's also been developed for the whole C2C project, so all of the other learning areas, including languages, is our resources library. Being that French and Japanese has all been uploaded at this stage, we have, we're the first sort of, or Japanese and, French and Japanese are the first 2 languages that are available on as a part of the resources library. There's a couple of different ways that you can access the resources on the library. You can go into your language specific, and then that's broken down into year level. It goes through all of the resources for each unit within that year level. So there's usually, there's 4 units per year level in each of the bands, and that's for the P2-10 sequence for French and Japanese. German and Chinese is available on Download Manager already, but they weren't quite sort of ready when this site was uploaded, so they will be available at that top section where French and Japanese is at the moment within the next couple of weeks. I'm told that will all be uploaded. The other sections at the bottom is how you can access the learning objects, ebooks and other texts, and the songs and rhymes that are attached to each of those, to each of the units, and language specific. Curriculum documents is the Australian curriculum documents. Our learning objects are all our introductory spoken text and our audio-visual learning objects that are attached to each of the units. Ebooks and other texts, most of them are ebooks in there, and also there's audio files for songs and rhymes. So it's a great sort of way into accessing. If you don't want to access the whole unit, you can sort of just look for single resources. I'm going to hand it over to Kirsten now.
Okay, so I guess my passion in overseeing the writing of the materials has become much more evident in me moving into this space of the P2-4, and I found my calling, I think, a little bit in developing the P2-4 materials in particular. So I'm very happy to speak to the all 6 languages that have been and are still currently being written in this area, and of course the units in the early years reflect the same features as our units for students in years 5 to 10. So they're conceptually based, they're sequential and focused on developing communication skills through intercultural inquiry, and of course they have the component of reflection as an essential part of the Australian curriculum embedded in them, and these feature predominantly or within each unit. So we'll take a bit of a look at some of these key features, and it links in quite nicely with what Fiona has said about that new beautiful resource library that is now up. So here you can probably already guess visually where these little snippets of the package that comes from the target country, in which language they go. And so the aim is to open students up to a wider world around them and their lives and experiences of other children globally, whilst using their own experiences and immediate environment as a starting point of investigation. So in terms of language acquisition, we focus on developing oral and oral skills and the developing intercultural understanding through rich and engaging learning that models best practice language learning and age-appropriate pedagogies. So this leads us nicely into the next slide. Thank you.
Sure.
And so you probably recognise that these mascots, again, have some sort of like a little slant or the names that work quite well within each of the languages. So for German it's Izzy, and we had some very interesting little editing queries when it became, as the English speakers read the name, when it was with an apostrophe, because in German we don't use apostrophes for the genitive case, and of course it became ISIS. So there were a few alarm bells ringing for that little name, but of course, we explained and rewrote and it worked all out. So these ideas of mascots engage students and guide learning within each of the language areas. For those of you who have taught in the early years, you will be well aware of the value of imaginative play, and especially in experimenting with language, as this becomes a very valuable tool for engagement and promoting communication. And so let me just expand a little bit on this point of best practiced early years pedagogy. So the units tap into the inquisitive nature of young children by promoting play-based learning. The activities are aimed at encouraging students to interact with one another and to experiment and play with language and have fun with it. So each key idea has a short slideshow, and this is very much along the lines of what happens in the 5 to 10 units. So they teach in the slideshows, new language and concepts is being taught, supporting learning resources are called teaching notes in the P2-4, and they are more like suggested learning activities rather than worksheets, because that doesn't quite go along with the kind of like early years pedagogy. So the slideshows provide a sequence for teaching and learning, the opportunity for students to engage with age-appropriate texts, and we will talk a lot further on the learning objects, stories, songs and rhymes, and I have embedded some examples thereof. They link to support documents which provide opportunities for consolidation and differentiation, and like all the others, are adaptable. So the teacher notes, they suggest learning experiences appropriate to the age and the context for learning. They move from lower to higher order thinking and are organised into whole class, small group and pair activities so that students interact with their peers throughout the lesson. And finally, they include resources aligned to the suggested learning experiences and provide visual stimuli such as photographs, illustrations, maps, games and conversation cards. And so what we have brought along, and hopefully there is a bit of time at the end to engage with some of the samples. Most of them come from the upper years, 5 to 10, but over here we have brought along a selection of ebooks that for all 6 languages, and they sit over there, and I hope that you do get an opportunity to really have a look at the richness of these resources. And they are, with our illustrators, we are so very lucky to have such a fantastic resource space of tapping into and getting illustrators to capture what it is that makes that intercultural language learning so very rich. So I now come to the audio components, and I'd like you, before I go into my little spiel, just engage a little bit with what you hear and see.
Fahren los im Januar, ja im Juni jedes Jahr, dann im Juli ist ja klar. Johanna, Johann, Julia, fahren los im Januar.
Okay, so another one.
10 Zappelzebras ziehen zum Zoo. 10 Zappel.
Oh, sorry, go just back. Oh.
Ohio, Ohio, Sensei, Ohio, minasan.
红色的红色的 red red red， 绿色的绿色的 green green green。
Okay, so on this slide, just stay with that slide for one little while. So the audio clips are using voices of different target culture, children and adults, and in this way, of course, students are exposed to a variety of voices and accents through songs, stories and rhymes. It was really important to us to make that really authentic. So we didn't want to have, because we probably all have known resources where, you know, a clearly 40, 50-year-old voice speaks something and pretends to be a 13-year-old. And, you know, that just gets students going, well, no, that's not right. So we were going for that authentic approach here, and young learners therefore not only learn accurate pronunciation and intonation, but also participate in activities that allow them to develop language through repetition and song. And as we all know, that is how we learn languages. We learn our very first, our mother tongue, by just repetition, and of course, you know, everything is pointed out, visually accessible. And so therefore, our audio components are accompanied by visual support to appeal to and engage a young audience, and that was just a little snapshot. So this one will be a very brief, and Fiona, you can just go straight into it, please. So here I just wanted to give you a bit of an example of how we scaffold our learning opportunities. So this is a segment of the slideshow, but then we pull it through, and if you just give a
quick...
Das ist der Vater, rund und gut.
So any of those, maybe just another few, but you don't need to play it. But you can see that each line now is segmented of that little poem and being very well scaffolded visually, and therefore, you know, the children are encouraged to have those actions, gestures, and of course mimic that pronunciation. Thank you. Then we come to our learning objects, and here these learning objects, they are also, you know, they are longer and core interactive texts, the learning objects, and which drive the unit, and the learning objects and ebooks really have often a little English brief narrational context statement. So we'll just listen to a couple of slides maybe.
Ecco Bruno, lui è la mia mascotte. Bruno è piccolo. Bruno ha il naso piccolo.
Yes, and now let's just have a little listen to the Indonesian one.
Danan, kamu suka makan apa? Saya suka makan makanan Indonesia. Saya juga. Isi keranjang pikniknya apa? Ini kue bolu. Kamu suka makan kue bolu?
Okay, thank you. And so earlier Fiona mentioned that the Languages Resource Library, and so the interactive texts can be found via the three buttons along the bottom, and they are segmented, as Fiona has already pointed out. They are segmented into learning objects, ebooks and other texts, and songs and rhymes. And that really makes it so very easy to find all these interactive texts, and they're organised by language, and as Fiona has already mentioned, soon all of those 6 languages will be there to be found there. And finally, my last slide for this component is a tiny bit of a reflection on assessment. So for the early years, P to 4, each unit addresses an aspect of the achievement standard. Early years assessment reflects the needs and capabilities of young children and the basics of language acquisition. Years 2 to 4 tasks assess both communicating and understanding, and Prep and Year 1 assess communicating only. However, Prep and Year 1 have summative assessment in only 2 of the 4 units, with monitoring of learning in the other 2 units. So it's very light on in terms of the assessment in these early years. And monitoring opportunities are highly prevalent in the P to 4 units. Many units have monitoring checklists that describe the language capabilities aligned to the learning experiences and reflect the achievement standard, and that of course is included in the language examples that have been tailored to the specific unit in which they occur. And you can see here just 3 little examples of one, the observation record down below with the language samples that can be monitored in the classroom with the language in it. Then you have a very light, and the red, what you see as red is really just the model response, and that is always the sort of like the student model response, as we would say, it would be the highest achievable one. So, you know, a student maybe stringing together 2 sentences would still have the opportunity to basically pass and have everything covered. And you see just the outline of the assessment task over there on the left. And of course, you can explore them through the unit
plans. When Fiona was talking about the download manager, the assessment tasks sit separately so that they can't be accessed by students, and therefore they will be downloaded on the unit plan. And band plans are really your go-to place, as are the elaborations in your Australian curriculum document. So I'm handing back over to Fiona now.
Is there any questions before we move on to something else? Or
I have a question, please. So you just said model response was indicative of
An A standard.
An A standard. Okay.
Yes.
That's interesting. I've been told differently by somebody who's not quite as knowledgeable as you. So that's good to know.
Yes,
my kids are achieving a little bit higher than I thought they were in that case.
Okay, wonderful.
That's good.
It's good that you had that opportunity to ask.
I was told that was indicative of a C standard.
No, the model response is indicative of an A standard.
it's an aspirational model response. All of the model responses that we provided, even within the SLRs and things along those lines, they're considered to be an aspirational response.
So I'm just repeating that, I think, for our audience here. So Fiona just reiterated that point. The question was whether the model responses actually align with the C standard or with a A standard, and the response is no. They're aspirational, that is, they are indicative of an A standard, okay, aspirational, so the highest possible standard.
So, like I mentioned before, we've been sort of reflecting on our units and how they've been presented and what we've learned through the writing of the resources over the last three years, basically. So, and more recently, we've started looking at how we can provide advice to teachers to access the units and utilise the resources in a variety of different contexts. We've always said that the resources are adaptable to each teacher's context, but what we've started to sort of look at is providing sort of concrete advice that can sort of help you and assist the busy teacher in accessing the whole units, because I'm sure you're aware if you download the units there's a whole bunch of resources and finding your way through them, it can be a little bit daunting. So these advice documents are not published at the moment. I haven't got actual advice documents. We've started sort of looking at the framework of these, but this is going to shape our work in the future once the Indonesian and Italian P4 has been completed writing. That's basically where we're sort of moving to from here. We have started looking at a few different sort of things, and I'm going to touch on all four of these sort of ways to adapt the units and spend a little bit of extra time with the first one, adapting units to align with the Year 7 entry sequence. And also I've got a few sort of strategies for differentiating for entry point Year 5, and I have some activities that give you an opportunity to have a look at it and sort of apply the strategies that I'm sort of suggesting, or that we've been sort of working to suggest. Now this sort of sits a little bit separately to these advice documents that I'm talking of, but what we've actually had the opportunity to do is to develop a unit, a model unit for all 6 languages that caters for students using or teachers using the entry point Year 7 sequence. So all of our other resources that we've created in the past as a part of the suite of resources have been utilising the F to 10 framework. But when we come to presentations such as this and gone to other sort of forums, we have had teachers that have said to us, but what about students who are entering their language studies or starting a new language when they get to high school? So we've listened and we've put together a model unit for all 6 languages that still working on the way it will be uploaded, but it will probably be available on Download Manager for teachers to use at the beginning of 2019. So that means it should be available towards the end of this year on Download Manager. Just the actual sort of site for it, just sort of watch this space. As soon as I know where it's going to be available, I'll put it up on sort of forums, and we can advertise it through the MLTAQ and things along those lines, because it's a different sequence to all the other learning areas. We haven't utilised different sequences for other learning areas, so they've got to work out a few different things. Can you go back? As a part of this process, we looked at we started with some of the units that we had already published, but then the unit really morphed into its own sort of space. So we were utilising the content descriptors and descriptions and achievement standard of the Year 7 entry sequence, and so it does look very, very different to the units that we were basing it on. Our starting point was What's in a Name, which is 5-6 Unit 1. How Do I Express My Self-Identity was another unit that we were looking at, which is 7-8 Unit 1. And the What Do My Interests Say About Me is also another unit that we were sort of drawing from as well, which is in the 7-8 band as well. The last thing I wanted to sort of say about this was that somebody asked me a question about it. Is it age appropriate for entry point Year 7 students? So we've talked about, we've sort of mentioned that, say for example, the What's in a Name unit could be adapted for an entry point Year 7 student before, but a lot of the resources are not targeted to a Year 7 student. This unit is very much so targeted towards Year 7 entry. It gives them the context that they're starting at a new school, and it allows them to explore introducing themselves in the target language and interacting in the target language in a variety of different ways. So it's a very I think it's a really powerful unit. I'm actually quite proud of all of the languages that we've put together for this. So I really do hope that it does go up there, because I think it's going to be a very, very useful resource. Now, this adapting for Year 7 entry context, this is looking at the current published resources and finding strategies for you to be able to access them. So these are 3 sort of steps that I'll go through now in a little bit more detail. To sort of describe what we've sort of looked at to also adapt our published units for the Year 7 entry sequence. So, Kirsten, she's too quick and now she's too slow. So when we create a unit for C2C, we start by looking at the curriculum. We select elements or aspects of the achievement standard and the relevant content descriptions for that unit, and we address and assess within each unit. And across each band, we're ensuring that there is coverage and alignment to all of the achievement standard and all of the content descriptors, at least once across the band. We did sort of try to do it once per year, but that didn't always lend itself towards, the units didn't necessarily always lend itself towards that. So when you're adapting a unit, it's important to maintain the integrity of the assessment task and ensure that the achievement standard is still covered and the content descriptions are adequately, that they're covered by the end of the band, basically. This is an example of a published band plan. The ticks talk about where each of the content descriptors are addressed or assessed within each unit. Each unit has a breakdown about what the unit is about, and it also breaks down in the assessment section just here. It actually gives the elements of the aspects of the achievement standard that are being assessed within that assessment task. Both the F to 10 and the Year 7 entry sequences of the Australian curriculum are structured in the same, using the same strands and sub-strands. So if we've got socialising in, say, for example, 7-8 Unit 1, then you can utilise the corresponding Year 7 entry sequence socialising content description within the unit and the key idea that's associated with that. The Year 7 entry sequence is designed for learners to reach similar language proficiency to the end of by the end of Year 10. So I've had a sort of, because I have had the opportunity of reading things like the Achievement Standard over and over again for a variety of languages. I have that sort of luxury of being able to do that. I can sort of see the similarities and very much the similarities between the two. The 7-8 band for both sequences is actually quite similar. The differences lie in the language examples, which are not accessible. They're not accessible. They're examples only, and the processes are a lot more specific in the F to 10, basically because the students, it's assumed that the students have had that knowledge from, or have had an introduction to language, or have had language studies, continuous language studies through to Year 10. So that's basically where I sort of see that. The band plans can be, the published band plans can be adapted so that you can ensure coverage of the curriculum if you're using the 7 to 10 entry sequence. And the assessment task, I'm going to sort of show you an example in a moment about how the assessment task can be maintained, basically, and used as is. This is just an example for you to show you the similarities, or to highlight the similarities between the achievement standards. So the left-hand side has, the left-hand side has the F to 10 sequence. Students use spoken and written Italian to interact in a range of personal and social contexts. And then in the Year 7 entry sequence for the 7-8 band, social interactions, there's the interaction, and related to personal and social school world. So that's sort of the socialising aspect of the achievement standard. The same kind of thing comes across in the informing. And that makes adapting the C2C tasks more simple. So as an example, this is a GTMJ, obviously. This is based on this GTMJ comes from the Italian 7-8 Unit 2, which I think is what is my family or something. I can't remember the actual unit title. It will come up in just a moment. But the example, the F to 10, the achievement standard, the aspects of the achievement standard that are being assessed are presented up the top so that's directly taken from that achievement standard paragraph. So the communicating is the top paragraph, because the achievement standards are split into the two. The communicating paragraph, we use one poll for communicating and one poll for the understanding. So the aspects of the achievement standard that we're looking at in this one is using spoken Italian to interact in a range of personal and social contexts, present people, talk about personal, social and school worlds, and then we've contextualised it in the C standard to the actual task. Same thing, Kirsten. Same things happened in the understanding. So it's just contextualised, knows that language is chosen to reflect context of situation, knows that language is chosen to reflect context of situation, and chooses Italian team speak appropriate to a context. So that's the example as published with an A to E level outlined. Sorry, Kirsten, can you flip it now? Okay, this is the communicating side by side, using both. So what I've done, or what we've done, is we've kept the top because that's the same. That's the top part is from the aspects of the achievement standard, using the F to 10 sequence on the left and the 7 entry achievement standard sentences on the right. contextualise the C, but if you'll notice, the E, D, B and A is all the same. So if you're using either of the achievement standards, you can adapt the task, and that way, if you don't even have to adapt the task, you can use the task as is, and that way it ensures the students are able to aim for the sky and aim for that aspirational response. This is just this is another example of the understanding side, basically. So contextualise, but the achievement standard for this is exactly the same. In the understanding paragraph, there is a corresponding phrase or aspect of the achievement standard for this particular one. It doesn't always happen like this, but in this particular context, and that's probably why I chose it, it was a little bit easy. So they're actually, the same sentences are repeated across the achievement standard, both bands. Okay. You might want to adapt the assessment task though to make it a little bit more accessible to your students. So these are some suggestions about how you can adapt the task to make it that way for your students. So say for example, in this Italian one of the questions was, what can you see or do there? This question can stay as is because it's really open-ended. You can, the students may extract individual words or phrases from the text to demonstrate their understanding at any kind of level. What makes this place beautiful or interesting is a lot more specific, or it's more specific. It's still open-ended, but it might be difficult for some entry-level students to answer. So prompts such as a keyword in Italian could be added here to support students. And then the bottom part, write 3 sentences comparing the 2 destinations in Italian. For an entry-level student, they might find it a little bit daunting to write 3 sentences. So we could make it more open-ended by allowing students to choose how many sentences to write. You can add some helpful language or structures that give students sort of a way in or a place to start. But so those 3 dot points there, so the open-ended question, that's fine, providing guidance or support, but something that needs to definitely be considered is that if you remove a question, you need to make sure that the students can still achieve the A standard in the GTMJ. So there might be a question that's not quite relevant to the GTMJ. It might be a supplementary sort of question for the C or the A, and so it might actually be able to be removed to make the task a little bit shorter. I'll sort of go on to the other strategies, and then we can talk about if there's any questions at the end if we've got more time. Another thing to do with Year 7 entry, and this also comes up in the Year 5 as well, is that we've looked, now that we've written all the units and we've got titles for and concepts for all of the units across the F to 10 sequence, the P to 10 sequence, we've started sort of interrogating the units that have covered or that are based around similar concepts. So things like concepts such as like identity, active play, family, society issues, things along those lines. I've sort of been working together making links between units that we've sort of titled as complementary units. Units in the 5-6 band could be supplemented into the Year 7-8 band, but you would still need to make sure that you were maintaining the age-appropriate resources, as well as the appropriate band statements, so the achievement standards and the content descriptions from the band of the students that you're teaching. You can supplement units with key ideas from the 5-6 band to help entry-level students out with some prior knowledge or prior learning. This is an example of a prior learning slideshow in the 5-6 Unit 1 What's in a Name for Italian, but that could also be used in the 7-8 Unit 1 How Do I Express My Self-Identity. It's not covered in the unit, but for entry-level students, they could access, or you could provide them access to these resources to get them to give them ideas about how to sort of introduce themselves and saying their name. And the assessment task for that one is a personal blog. This is another example of so that's an Italian resource. The what was I looking at for that one? So basic skills. Oh no, that's so wrong. So supplement units. What do my interests say about me? So this is like developing their capacity about talking about their interests and planning a video for talking about themselves and their interests in Italian. This other resource, the Japanese resource, is from the 3-4 Unit 5, which is Amazing Places, yes. And it's actually in the prior learning for that 3-4 band, but it gives students, especially for script recognition and things along those lines, it's a different text type to the postcard that we were just looking at in the Memorable Places assessment task, but it gives them a way in of sort of looking at assessment tasks or looking at texts that use script. Okay. The next few slides, I've got some strategies to adapt resources for Year 5 entry. So this is a slightly different process, although it does use a lot of the strategies that we've been sort of outlining for the Year 7 entry. So reviewing the assessment task, identifying complementary units, and supplementing unit resources. So I'll go into a little bit more detail of each of those. So reviewing the assessment task, something that we are also going to hopefully be working on is reviewing the actual assessment tasks in the Year 5 band to make them a little bit more accessible for Year 5 entry students. So to show the differentiation of those. This task for German is a very sort of open-ended sort of task that allows for a variety of level of learners within the class. So it's suitable for any kind of level of students. It allows for the open-ended responses, and you can edit the resource because it's just in Word to remove some of the aspects if you don't want to assess them, or you could add some more prompts to help the students out. This is a little bit more of a idea or across the complementary units. So the 3-4 units especially have been designed to sort of pair up with a unit in the 5, not necessarily pair up, but with similar. There are a lot of units that do have similar concepts. The biggest link, or the easiest link that I can sort of show you is My Place, Your Place, which is Year 3 Unit 1. So there's texts in there that could supplement entry level students in the What Are Personal Spaces unit for Year 5. There's similar types of texts, and in the folders, in each language folders, that's one of the resources that I actually provided, is the sheet, the model response, and any of the texts for the Year 5 that could be adapted to suit an entry-level student. But one way of doing that, and that's on the next slide.
Are we able to have a copy of that slide?
This is not a published document. This is just sort of a working out sort of thing. It's still very much in draft format, hasn't gone through any kind of it's just sort of to highlight the concepts that are similar concepts, basically.
It's very useful.
Possibly. I can't guarantee it, but possibly.
Can I just say that, because I know that Lester at one stage last year asked me in regards to, you know, it would be so useful to just have I'm just coming here near you, just to even have the titles and that overview of what's what. And so can I just redirect you to the band plans again, because there you've got it. Okay, so this is not, once you've got, the concepts are always mentioned as well. So if you engage with the band plans thoroughly, you will find it in there and you've got that overview. All we've done is basically pulled it out and made it, you know, a nice colourful adjusted, but I agree with you. It would be a wonderful document and you wouldn't need to reinvent the wheel.
The biggest sort of hurdle that that we've sort of come across though is that sometimes, say for example, the who's in my family and what is family, even though they're similar concepts, it's a year 1 unit and a year 5 unit. So some of the resources might be suitable for a year 5 student, but they might find it a little bit too sort of babyish for them as well. So that's another sort of thing to be considered along those sort of lines as well. You'd have to adapt them or maybe utilise some of the resource within your adapted unit. And this is just an example of the personal spaces. This is a slideshow. So both of these are dealing with the informing one content description of gathering information about a favourite personal space. And the other slideshow is the 3/4 band unit that has simpler texts, but a similar kind of concept. Yeah. Okay, so this is just a one slide sort of one, adapting for different time allocations. I think there might be something about this coming out a little bit earlier than the other sort of things. The Global Schools Put Through Languages team have been sort of, they actually asked us to sort of provide advice to them about strategies that we could adapt for time, especially different time context, less time. I know that we're time poor in primary schools quite often. So this is just a little bit of a snapshot. So integrating aspects of one key idea into another. For example, combining elements of a communicating key idea with an understanding key idea, such as the systems of language could be incorporated in the grammatical forms and structures could be incorporated in the communicating, the socialising or the informing when that sort of structure has been, the students have been exposed to that structure. You could have the students look at or reflect on the language variation that's used depending on the context when the text is, so when the students are exploring the text, so they could look at the variation in language. I know definitely in Japanese, varying according to who you're speaking to. Why do you think that they're using more a different greeting with this person than they do with another person? And it's just a sort of on the side reflecting when it happens within the key idea rather than doing a whole nother key idea. Another thing that you could do is reduce the number of activities. There's suggested activities in the teacher notes and the SLRs, although especially in the 5 to 10, the activities are presented from lower order to higher order, and the activities at the end are designed as consolidation, sort of, or a culminating activity that offers the opportunities to synthesize their learning within the from the key idea. So that last sort of task is probably the one that you maybe would like to sort of go to make sure that they have their have that opportunity. But you need to, what you could do is select opportunities that you think assist your students in your context, that prepare them for the assessment task. So look for the activities that help them or support them to prepare for the assessment, and using some of the scaffolding activities maybe within a slideshow. That's another sort of way to sort of supplement it, and maybe even break up a slideshow rather than teach talk, and so getting them to do activities at the same time. One more. Removing key ideas, non-essential key ideas. A lot of the units will have assessed and addressed key ideas. The addressed key ideas may not be assessed within a unit, so they might be able to actually be removed from the unit. Something to be careful of though is to check the band plan, because if that's the only place that the content description has actually been covered, then removing it makes it difficult to actually cover it in another unit. Okay, and adapting for other languages. So we've got the 6 languages that form part of our project. Kirsten and Laura have presented to the Spanish Teachers Network on adapting, say, Italian resources to utilise in a Spanish classroom. It hasn't been within our brief to write Spanish resources, so we've sort of been looking at a few different strategies that you can do. It's similar to what we did with the Year 7 entry sequence, aligning the content descriptions and the achievement standard, and aligning the assessment to the appropriate achievement standard, looking at the concepts and the intercultural learning that's happening in the Italian unit, and seeing how that can be passed across to to a Spanish context, and then looking at how the teaching and learning can be adapted for a Spanish context. Sometimes it could be translating between Italian and Spanish. Sometimes it involves a little bit more because the intercultural sort of situation is a little bit is different. So yeah, I've rushed through, but that's the end of the presentation. So I'm Kirsten, David, myself, we're all sort of open for questions.
And Catherine already had raised a question when we had that little
activity. Just one of the teachers online had a all-school PD at their school, their primary school, across all subject areas, and there was a question raised about, so there seems to be confusion around matching students' work to standards. Some thinking that because the standard is a C, that students can't receive an A until the end of the band level, because they, by the time they've demonstrated everything in the band, until they've demonstrated everything in the band. We've had a little discussion here, just quietly here, that doesn't seem reasonable. But yeah, I just wondered whether anyone else was having those sorts of conversations at their schools, or concerns, or etc.
No, because they're one man band.
Yeah.
No consultation.
Nothing.
So no problem.
Sorry.
No, you're right.
So, are there any questions that you have, or have we been brilliantly covering all aspects of this very large topic?
Specific to Japanese, so I'm happy just to ask that on the side. Okay, great.
Yeah.
I've got a question regarding the actual word itself that's used in the, for example, my favourite space. Only because looking at the word spazio in Italian, it takes a sort of irregular article, if you like. So instead of the normal masculine il, it would take lo. So would that be a problem, for example, to replace that with my favourite place rather than my favourite space?
So are you referring to something that's been written in, that is a document that is from a Cara, or are you looking at
just
yeah.
I think that's actually one of the bands talking about your space and your identity.
Yeah.
What's the space that you like to go to? So it's specifically space, even in the assessment.
Yeah.
The sort of examples are given using this particular, and spazio is more, to me it's more like space, like outer space, rather than place in Italian.
And that's, yeah, and because all the text, apart from the learning objects, obviously, you might have to find a creative way around that, but within the assessment task, within the resources, they're adaptable, so you could replace that word if you wanted to, or you could address it with your students and say, well, this is what we're talking about, whether we're talking about a space or a place. So that, yeah.
It's easier from the grammar point of view as well.
Yeah.
When you're putting it together with your possessives and putting it together with your articulated prepositions.
I think really the point of having and providing teachers with these C2C units is so that we give a wonderful body of resources and a framework, and we provide you with texts and, you know, listening resources and whatever else. And if you find that there is some point where you need to really, you feel quite strongly about it and you want to adapt it, that is totally your prerogative.
Okay.
So
because it's across all the unit.
Yes, because it was clearly, a decision was made by the assistant manager of Italian and the writers to go down that path. But, you know, that is something that you either want to explain to the students in one session, or, as I said, if you feel strongly about it, then you would be able to adapt and adopt that and change that. Yeah, so that would be an approach that could be applied to any learning experience. Heidi?
You would, as you said, some of those key concepts or words are linked to key concepts that will appear in things like the e-books, in which case I think then it's your, as a teacher, to...
There'll be a lot of adapting to do.
Well, to account the particular concept or word that you want to discuss, and then...
Or maybe it's a good thing, you just jump straight to the complicated grammar. This is the exception to the, you know, the use of the masculine singular.
I think it's more done in language chunks at that particular age. So it might be that they're learning that formulaically.
Yes.
In a chunk, rather than analysing the difference in grammar and the articles, etc. So that would be for you to look at with your cohort.
So it was just, I'm just reiterating some of the response that has come from Heidi, and that is that all of the learning that really takes place, like one of the I guess the base underpinnings of our teaching and learning sequences here is that we're not just looking at individual words or vocabulary, but that everything that occurs is either in the early years when concepts or grammar rules, and, you know, I'm wearing my German hat here, and there are plenty of grammar rules in German, that this is either done in using chunk language, or it is done in terms of formulaic teaching of sentence structures and endings. And you know, we have stayed right clear of teaching any adjectival endings in P2-4. Let me just reinforce that. So, you know, but it can still be done in quite creative ways, but why would you want to go down that route and go, you know, disencourage any of the learners by that kind of thing? But, you know, the opportunities are there for you to adapt and adopt. guess that's the message really. If there aren't any questions, I would really like to, I guess, invite you to just have a bit of a look around, and because some of you, how many of you, Fiona has asked at the very beginning, and you were kindly nodding your heads, but how many of you actually use the resources because they are IQ teachers, actually use the resources, or they are already uploaded on Scootle and can be accessed by Catholic and independent schools? So how many of you use the languages on a daily basis? Okay, or often, regularly, whatever.
The C2C materials.
C2C materials, yes. Okay, great. All of it. All of it. Wonderful. Just touch it. Yeah. Okay, I think, yeah, so have a look around, please, at all of our realia and bits and pieces.
Around, I'd just like to thank you so much, Fiona, Kirsten, and Laura, and David for coming along today. It's been really useful. I've seen how many people have come here. Introduce Chanel, who's our new cameraman, replacing Ron, who retired. And we'll have a lot of people having a look at that one on the line. And Catherine Tominaga, who's our state president, MLTAQ, for having people. We've had a number of people on the go to meeting here today as well. So it was great that you could be here. So thanks everybody. Thank you. And yeah, take some time to have another muffin. And
before everyone stands up, MLTAQ, state conference is the very beginning of the June-July holidays, the 1st and 2nd of July at the University of the Sunshine Coast. Be a nice time of year to be up there. So please look at the information on our website, emails, etc. Whatever, we'd love to. It's going to be very much about practice and teachers sharing their practice. We've had some good submissions, and welcome any more, please. Feel free to, we'd love people to share their practice. Should be a really good opportunity to learn and take that back to your classrooms for term 3.
Thanks.